The Swoose is one of the most iconic aircraft of World War II. Originally called Ole Betsy, this B-17D Flying Fortress aircraft was part of the team that flew the first U.S. bomber mission during the war. The B-17 received its official nickname, the Swoose, when Australian repairmen changed its tail to a smaller shark-shaped fin. The tail reminded Captain Weldon Smith of a popular song about a tormented animal that was half-swan, half-goose. But no one was quite as smitten with the Swoose as Colonel Frank Kurtz. The personal pilot of Lieutenant General George Brett, commander of the Allied Air Forces in Australia, became fascinated with the aircraft and even named his child after the plane. Together, they carried out many air combat missions, but Kurtz was determined to make history and set off to break a few records. Ole Betsy. The B-17 Flying Fortress was developed in the late 1930s by aerospace company Boeing. It was a 4-engine heavy bomber. The aircraft received worldwide recognition as one of the principal bombers used in the daylight strategic bombing campaign during World War II. Throughout the war, the Flying Fortress became a symbol of America's air power. 17 B-17 crew members received the Medal of Honor. As the third most produced aircraft in the world at the time, the B-17 experienced changes throughout the years. It was adapted into an extensive catalog of variants ranging from A to H, each with unique elements. The B-17D model had a new set of cowling flaps to improve cooling and a revised electrical system. The D model guns were doubled, and it was reinforced with heightened armor protection. A total of 42 B-17D models were built, and 18 B-17Cs were upgraded. The airframe that would become the Swoose was the 38th B-17D model to be accepted by the Army Air Corps on April 25, 1941, in Seattle, Washington. The approved B-17D, serial number 40-3097, was then delivered to the 19th Bombardment Group at Marchfield, California. A month later, the group flew 21 Flying Fortresses to Hamilton Field in the Bay Area. On May 31st, 20 aircraft made the 2,400-mile trip to Hickam Field, Hawaii. This was the first mass-coordinated flight of land-based aircraft to fly to Hawaii. The Flying Fortresses departed California in 5-minute intervals. They landed in Hawaii with less than 6 minutes between each other. Every crew member received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Soon after the 40-3097 arrived at the Hawaiian base, Lieutenant Henry Godman joined the plane's crew as pilot and aircraft commander. On December 5th, the aircraft flew 600 miles with a team of B-17s to a landing strip at a pineapple plantation on the Filipino island of Mindanao. After these flying missions, the 40-3097's crew had grown fond of their particular Flying Fortress. They nicknamed her Ole Betsy. The Pacific. Hours after the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941, Ole Betsy and another B-17 made several reconnaissance flights in and around Mindanao. It was probably the first U.S. bomber mission of the conflict. In the following weeks, Lieutenant Godman and his crew took Ole Betsy on several successful missions, including a departure from Mindanao Island to strike Japanese forces invading the Philippines. On one occasion, Ole Betsy set out to bomb the Lingayen Gulf on the country's northwestern side. Soon after takeoff, Ole Betsy experienced engine trouble. Instead of aborting the mission, Lieutenant Godman opted for an alternate target at the closer Davao Gulf. Ole Betsy arrived at Davao Gulf in total darkness, but the crew was able to release their bomb load, using lights and movement in the harbor to aim correctly. The B-17 turned around to return to base safely on the last leg of the first U.S. night bombing attack of World War II. Half-swan, half-goose. By the end of December, Ole Betsy was relocated to a new base in Java, Indonesia, and continued to fly combat missions. On January 11, 1942, Ole Betsy engaged with 3 Japanese fighters off the Borneo coast. After 35 minutes of battle, the crew managed to shoot down 2 aircraft. The B-17 escaped, but with enough damage to mark the end of its career as a bomber. Ole Betsy was flown to Melbourne, Australia for a complete overhaul. Maintenance personnel replaced its damaged tail with a smaller shark fin-like tail, scavenged from another Flying Fortress. They also substituted its damaged engines with newer ones and converted the bomber into armed transport. In February, Ole Betsy received a new crew, with Captain Weldon Smith as its new pilot. Given its renewed and awkward appearance, Smith gave Ole Betsy a new nickname, the Swoose. The name came from a popular song about a half-swan, half-goose. Smith and his crew flew the Swoose for a month, then moved on to another aircraft. On March 17th, the plane returned to Melbourne for more repairs. General Brett. In the spring of 1942, Frank Kurtz, the personal pilot of Lieutenant General George Brett, commander of the Allied Air Forces in Australia, took over the Swoose. The aircraft became General Brett's preferred aircraft, as it was in better condition than the other flying fortresses at Melbourne. It also had a newer armament and radio system. Brett flew the Swoose an average of 150 hours per month across Australia and into air bases in the combat zone. In May 1942, Kurtz and the Swoose broke the speed record flying from Sydney to Wellington, New Zealand. Once in New Zealand, Kurtz and his crew removed all armament, thus lightening the bomber by hundreds of pounds, and broke their own speed record during a flight from Wellington to Honolulu. The B-17 also carried several famous passengers, including Lieutenant Commander Lyndon B. Johnson, future President of the United States. When Lieutenant General Brett was relieved of his command in July, he returned to America aboard the Swoose with Kurtz as his pilot. After a brief stop in Honolulu, the aircraft arrived in California after a 36-hour and 10-minute flight. Because of this trip, the Swoose became the first American combat bomber to return from the front in World War II. In July 1943, Kurtz was made commander of the 463rd Bomb Group, and he was gifted with a new flying fortress that he also nicknamed the Swoose. The pilot was so taken with the name that he named his daughter Swoosie. Swoosie Kurtz later became a famous stage, screen, and television actress. The original Swoose that carried Brett across the Pacific remained his aircraft after the war ended, but with Captain Jack Crane as its new pilot. Brett and Crane flew aboard the Swoose to several countries in South America and the Caribbean until 1945, when they returned to the United States. After a few more short trips within the country, the Army decommissioned the Swoose at Kingman, Arizona, and General Brett retired. A place with no home. Despite its esteemed record filled with courageous missions, the Swoose was caught in the post-war demobilization to be scrapped and smelted down for its aluminum at the War Assets Administration building in Arizona. When Frank Kurtz heard about the plans to scrap his beloved aircraft, he contacted the mayor of Los Angeles, Fletcher Bowen, and arranged for the city to buy the bomber and use it in a war memorial. On April 6, 1946, Kurtz flew the Swoose one more time, from Arizona to the Los Angeles Municipal Airport. Among the aircraft's passengers were Mayor Bowen and Kurtz's wife. Following a welcoming ceremony, the B-17 was put into a hangar. When the memorial plans fell through due to budget cuts, the airframe remained in storage until it was donated to the Smithsonian Museum. It was refurbished in California, and in the spring of 1949, Kurtz flew it once again to a storage facility in Park Ridge, Illinois. The following year, it was taken to Texas to another facility, and 3 years later, in December of 1953, it was flown for the last time to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, arriving at the facility with only 3 functioning engines. For the next 6 years, the Swoose, a historical and valued aircraft, was stored outdoors at the National Air and Space Museum's Paul E. Garber Restoration Facility in Suitland, Maryland. It suffered significant damage from vandals and the weather. Amidst mounting criticism, by the mid-1970s, the Smithsonian moved the dismantled Swoose to an indoor hangar. Present day. In September 2007, the Air and Space Museum's Collections Committee voted to deaccession the aircraft and transfer it to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. A year later, the Swoose was permanently transferred to Dayton, Ohio for restoration and display. It was placed in the museum's restoration facility, amongst other aircraft such as the Memphis Belle, another iconic B-17 Flying Fortress. In the summer of 2012, the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force's website reported that a thorough evaluation of the Swoose had begun. The aircraft's interior was removed, and its fuselage was treated for corrosion control. Its iconic aft tail cone was also repaired, as were its doors, longeron, and machine guns. Volunteer machinists would fabricate its missing machinery. In 2019, the Swoose's restoration process was temporarily suspended in lieu of higher priority projects. The Swoose set plenty of records and captured the hearts of every one of its crew members. It still waits for a complete restoration.